Okay, so I think we're going to get started on time, very prompt. I want to thank you all for coming out this evening. Of course, we wish that every seat was filled and we had to add perhaps 30 or 40 more, but we're certainly happy that you came out. My name is Representative John Fusco, and I represent the 81st District, which essentially is the core of Southington and the southern portions. Join with my colleagues here tonight, and hopefully we can answer some questions from you, hear your concerns, and work out some of the details on some of the things that might be not so clear from this past legislative session. So having said that.
Go ahead, yeah.
No, you don't.
Next.
My name is Gail Master-Francesco, State Representative representing the 80th District, which covers Wolcott and part of Southington. Thank you all really for coming out tonight. I know it's a beautiful day. Everybody wants to go listen to the music on the green, but here we are, and I guess you guys thought we were your favorites as opposed to the music, so thank you. This was my first year as a representative, and thank you all for supporting me throughout the year and voting for me in the past. I found the session to be quite interesting as a freshman representative. A little frustrating, as I'm sure most of you are, to see all the bills and the language and the legislation that was passed throughout the year. But we did our best. We fought hard. And I would just really want to take this opportunity to ask, listen, we can sit up here all day long and kind of tell you how we feel, but really this forum is about you guys and how you feel. And so we're really here to answer questions for you and give you any type of information that you need. So I will pass that off to my colleague, Senator Sampson here.
And so good evening, everyone. Thanks to my colleagues for introducing themselves and giving me the opportunity to say hello and introduce myself also. Senator Rob Sampson. I'm from Wolcott, but I represent the 16th District, which includes all of Southington, Wolcott, and Prospect, and parts of Cheshire and Waterbury. This is my first term in the state Senate after serving 4 terms in the House, and that's an interesting conversation if anyone's curious about what the differences are. And as these guys said, we want to devote tonight to taking your questions and filling you in on what's happened at the state capitol and what our reaction to it is. And I'll just run through a list of things that we might talk about if that might get us started. The state budget, of course, was just passed on the second to last day of session in the Senate. I think the day before that in the House. My understanding is that the governor is signing the budget today behind closed doors, which is unusual. Usually the governor likes to take a victory lap when he signs the budget and makes a big deal out of it with a lot of fanfare, but interesting that he's signing this budget in a cloak and dagger kind of way. There was the increase in the minimum wage passed this year. The Paid Family Medical Leave Act passed this year. I didn't support either one of those items, but we can certainly talk about what those were about. There was a lot of conversation about tolls this year, recreational marijuana. There is the issue that just came up in the last week or so about the budget, whether it's actually balanced or not. We have a constitutional requirement to pass only a budget that's balanced on paper, and that's certainly a topic worth speaking about also that we should get into. And the public option, that's another thing that was spoken about but did not happen this year. And a lot of smaller bills. So if there's a topic that interests our guests today, we would love to kick it off and take some questions from you. So raise your hand.
The one thing I ask is that when you do ask a question, just tell us who you are. And I know these are not hooked. Are these hooked up? No, they're not. So I know I'm already getting some. I'm already getting some of these already to raise the volume. So if you can't hear us, just speak up or raise your hand, and we'll try to, project a little bit louder. Sir.
I have so many questions, but I'll start with just one of them.
And your name is?
I am Brian Corbino, as you three well know. The paid family and medical leave thing. I don't pretend to understand what is in the legislation, but as a small business owner and a sole employee, I don't pay income tax through withholdings. I have to do estimated submissions quarterly. Is this 0.5% tax actually going to hit me, even though I don't think I qualify for the Family Medical Leave Act because I can't really, you know?
Are you a union or a state worker?
Not to the best of my knowledge.
Why do you feel as though you don't qualify?
What's that?
Why do you feel as though you don't qualify?
Because I'm not an employee.
You're a sole proprietor?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're single?
But, you know, I don't understand the languages, so I don't know if this actually hits me or not.
You're correct, Brian. That's the test. It applies only to employees. If you're a self-employed or an independent contractor, they will not be taking the payroll tax deduction because it's only for payroll. It's a payroll tax deduction is what family medical leave is.
It doesn't make it any better, but it makes it better for me.
Yes. Sole proprietors will be allowed to opt into the program if they choose, and state employees are not included because I would say it's an excuse. They would say it's a reason, and that is because it can be negotiated as part of a collective bargaining agreement. Yeah, so just talking about this Family Medical Leave Act, you know, this brings up like a larger topic for me. And one of the problems I think that's happening in politics today is there's a great deal of confusion in the public when they look at what's happening in government. And there's a disconnect between what the intent of a policy is and what the actual policy is. And, you know, the people that are pushing the Family Medical Leave Act, the paid Family Medical Leave Act, are trying to say that the intent is to help people, you know, so that they can, you know, take time off so that they can care for a loved one, that kind of thing. That sounds like a very nice intent. But the policy is also important. You can't just rely on the intent of certain things. You need to know whether the policy goes along with it and it makes sense or not. The Family Medical Leave Act is actually already the law in Connecticut and on a federal level. And that is a law that says that if you are an employee and you have a family member that has a medical condition and there are certain things specified, you can take the time off. But they, in their wisdom, the state and the federal government, when they passed that legislation, made it only apply to businesses that had a significant number of employees, 50 employees on the federal level, 75 on the state level. This particular policy actually goes into effect if you have as little as one employee. It's terrible from a small business standpoint because you can imagine a small office where the key person, if they were to leave for 12 weeks, which is what is possible under this policy, that could be a tremendous hardship for the business owner. And then to accommodate that person when they come back at the end of the 12 weeks, after you've already hired someone else, and then you've got to let that person go, and that person can now collect unemployment. So there's going to be lots of ramifications for that all by itself. The other thing is that the benefit is extraordinary. If you make $1,000 a week, for instance, you can earn up to 90% of that benefit for 12 weeks. There is so much incentive for abuse here that it's going to be abused. And people are already planning to abuse it, I am sure. And it's going to run out of money in a heartbeat. It's very, very interesting that they passed the law this year, but it doesn't actually begin taking money out of paychecks until 2021, which is odd for me. Why are you waiting if it's such a good policy? And then they don't start paying benefits until 2022. There is a provision in this law that actually says that if they determine at some point after they begin collecting money that they will not have the money to pay it out, they can just discontinue the program and the money ends up in the general fund, the black hole of our state government. Yeah, I don't know if our viewers can hear the groaning in the audience, but that's what I did too. I groaned when I heard that myself because I said, is this ridiculous? It sounds like a scam, and I'm afraid that that's what it is. The intent is nice. Again, we want to help people. We want to give people options in our society. We offered, as Republicans, an alternative to this, which essentially would be an insurance policy. We set it up so that the insurance marketplace could begin to offer a product just like this, but it would be voluntary. There's no mandatory payroll tax coming out of everyone's paycheck. If you want to buy it, you buy it, and you get to decide what the parameters are. If you want a 50% benefit, it's going to cost one thing. If it's a 100% benefit, it would cost something else. It also means that by making an insurance product, it can be a benefit that an employer might want to offer their employees to entice them to come work for them. It's a much better solution. Freedom and opportunity, to me, is always the better option, and that's what we tried to offer in our version of an FMLA amendment. Anything you guys want to add?
Well, I would just add to that, there's a piece in there that tells you who is eligible to take a paid family medical leave, right? And one part of it that I found very disturbing is that you don't even have to care for a family member. It could be somebody who's like a family member. So if you can prove that it could be your neighbor, maybe you're very good friends with them and they come over and kind of take care of you and you consider them as a family member, that would make you eligible. It really is going to be a hardship on the employers. Again, it's great for the people that are taking it. I believe the cap on it is $600. It's $600, I believe, is the cap. It's 40 times the minimum wage. So by the time it takes effect, the minimum wage will be like $13, right? So the max you can collect is $700 a week. So somebody making, say, $50,000 a year, they're not going to get their full benefit for that. So there's a lot of people that will not even take the plan as offered, but yet they're paying for it. So it really is a hardship really on the employer. It's unfair to people that are not going to use it. And listen, when you think about it, you say that you're not going to use it. People in their mind are probably saying, well, I got to use this. I'm going to get paid for being home for 12 weeks, and maybe I can take care of my neighbor or a family member. It sounds wonderful. But think about the employer for a moment. Now, if somebody's gone for 12 weeks, they have to replace that person, right? They have to do something. And then when that person comes back, what happens to that person that's been covering there for 12 weeks, right? So now they have to leave. So there's a lot of moving parts to this plan. The concept is nice. We certainly want to help everybody. There's people out there that have children and they want to stay home and take care of them. You know, when I had kids, I saved my money. I mean, that was the natural thing that we did. I said, okay, I'm going to have a baby. I saved my money because I knew I was going to be out of work for a while. I saved up my vacation, took it, and then the rest of the time, I had to dig into my savings. And that's the way it was back then. For some reason today, we don't have those. We don't have that anymore. It's more people feel that they are owed it, I guess, more of like an entitlement that they deserve it. So I have some concerns. John, did you want to add something to that?
I think you covered it. You both covered that thing pretty well. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but the couple of concerns for me were, as Gail said, there's going to be a lot of people who won't benefit from this program. A lot of younger people and a lot of elderly people will pay into this, and they'll never really get the benefit from it. The other thing is that, we hear of businesses like Aflac who are out there who provide these types of insurances for people who perhaps are going to miss some work or feel they might want to start a family and so forth and pay into that. The reason why you don't see it on a broader level, and certainly understand that the state, when the legislature would have to give permission to the insurance commissioner to make these policies, to put them in effect, but it's not being done because, quite frankly, it's not lucrative. It's a loser, and that's why they don't do it. But the state is happy to jump into that arena with your tax dollars, and that's one of the things that's the most disturbing for me.
It's a question of personal responsibility.
They'll save, they'll put away, they'll put these percentages away, this 0.5% for a year. They'll collect X amount of dollars. It'll go into some type of trust, which is also, of concern to me. The state's not real good with handling trusts. And then they will begin to pay out on those amounts when people, claim these, make these claims for to be paid to be out of work. And if there's not enough money to go around, then they'll just unilaterally increase the amount. So we're going to start at 0.5%, but there's no saying how high it will go. And I don't know that the cry from the public would be enough to have them, to opt out of the, to take that clause and to get out of it. I don't know how far this will go. I felt from the beginning that, FMLA was a proper act for the people. My family has utilized it. but I think there's a sense of personal responsibility that goes along with it. In other words, you're going to suffer a bit because there's not going to be that pay coming in, so there's a balance. And I felt from the beginning that the non-paid portion of it was the gatekeeper for fraud. So now that we're going to go ahead and pay, to me, that's just the whole thing kind of goes afoul. So those are some of the things that were my biggest concerns with that.
What do we got next? Go ahead, Dan.
Dan DiVirgilio. Well, thank you guys for doing these town hall meetings.
Thank you, Dan.
There's a lot of things in here, I already talked to you about it, that really bother me. Fry my potatoes if you want to say something like that, but just everything's a tax. I mean, everything's just tax. I don't see anything in here that anybody did as far as, let's cut expenses first, the money we save, we'll build something. It was never brought up, never brought up. But one of the things in the first page here that kind of bothers me is that we have a law on the criminal justice and public safety, the civil immigration detainers. It's like it's like a law has been passed to legally allow us to not abide by the laws that are already on the books for immigration. Now, immigration is great. If you follow the right rules, we already have immigration rules, regulations in place, a process to do that. And yet we still have politicians in the state and other states that say it's okay to allow illegal criminals to have access to benefits that we've been paying forever, doing it the right way. And now we just passed a law that says it's okay not to work with the federal government. And how could that be right? I mean, what's your position and what do we do to correct, to me, a tremendous injustice on everybody who's done things the right way versus allowing people this kind of freedom?
Thank you for that question. So I'm going to turn this over to Senator Sampson because he's very passionate about this, as we all are, but he has been a leader in this cause. Let me ask the people here tonight, does anyone understand the Trust Act? Does anyone understand what Dan is alluding to with this current law? Do people understand what just happened with that legislation? Just by a raise of hands. Okay. So part of this law, what it was that when people are detained by law enforcement for committing a crime, and it is revealed that they are illegal citizens, right? We can call them, there's many things we can call people who aren't supposed to be here, but they're not citizens of the United States, right? They're the illegal aliens and so forth and so on. Well, they have removed the ability from law enforcement to communicate with federal authorities to alert them that they have someone who is here in the country illegally. And that is what Dan is talking about. And in fact, our good mayor from Hartford, I believe, just went on the record recently by engaging our federal government, proclaiming his, I don't even know how to say it, that that he's for this in every way, shape, and form, which I found to be quite amazing. So these people will remain in custody, and they will go through the justice system. So they're okay to be tried and go through the due process through the criminal justice system, but we will not have them held accountable for their illegal entry and positioning here, in our state. So I'm going to let the good senator expand upon that a little bit.
Well, thank you, Representative. The issue is a lot worse than it even sounds. What we're talking about is a bill that passed this year, Senate Bill 992, which is the expansion of the CT Trust Act. And the CT Trust Act was a law that passed in 2013, which did, as Representative Fusco said, shielded undocumented aliens, illegal aliens, from being reported to federal immigration authorities if they were picked up by the local police. There's a couple things I want to make really clear about this that people that support this policy never really want to talk about. They have a very good way of trying to blend together legal immigrants and illegal immigrants. And in this case, they're actually blending together legal immigrants, illegal immigrants, and criminals who also happen to be illegal aliens. And to me, that is the big concern with this policy. So the law since 2013 in Connecticut has been that if local law enforcement, the Southington Police, for instance, pick up someone for some crime and they discover that there is a civil detainer out for this person issued by ICE. A civil detainer is what the federal government uses as a mechanism to round up people that are illegal aliens who have also committed a crime. Because please understand that if you're in the country illegally, the law enforcement doesn't know you're here unless something happens to let them know you're here. So there are plenty of illegal aliens who do not have detainers out for them. Generally speaking, you've got to commit a crime, and that crime usually has to be something significant. At very least, it's got to be a Class A misdemeanor with at least a 1-year sentence, and that's important because I'll bring it up in a minute. If you have that, what will happen is you'll be reported to the federal authorities and they will issue a civil detainer. So the ICE folks will know about you and they will be keeping an eye out. And the normal way the law used to work in the past is if the Bridgeport police picked someone up for some reason and they said, oh, this person has a civil detainer, they would call ICE, and ICE would come down and grab that person and they would put them through a federal court process and possibly deport them. What the state of Connecticut did was made a law saying that cannot happen anymore, to shield these folks from being reported to the ICE authorities.
No matter what the town.
No matter what.
That's correct.
And this year, well, actually, that's not true. In 2013, they made several exceptions to that rule. They said some people are so bad that we cannot protect them from ICE. And there was a list of 7 or 8 things. If you were on the terrorist watch list,
Right.
if you had committed a felony in another state, if you are a known gang member, I don't remember all of them, but it's things like that. Those are the biggies. They said you're too bad, so we're still going to let ICE report you. This year, what they have done is done away with those exceptions. That's exactly what they did this year. So they are doubling down on protecting people that are in the country illegally to actually protecting people that are in the country illegally who are known terrorists or gang members or people who have committed felonies in other states. There was another bill this year, by the way, that they actually tried very hard to pass, and it passed out of the Judiciary Committee on a party line vote. And the only reason why it didn't become law this year is because myself and some other legislators made a real big issue about it and said that we would speak for days on end to prevent this from happening. And that was a law to change the length of time for a Class A misdemeanor. From 365 days or 1 year to 364 days, and for only one purpose: to shield people who are in the country illegally, if they committed a Class A misdemeanor, from being reported to ICE to have a civil detainer to begin with. It's despicable policy. Note that Class A misdemeanors include terrible things. I mean, it's not just minor crimes. There are significant crimes of assault and harassment and stalking and things like that all fall under that Class A misdemeanor category. Why there is a willful desire on the part of the majority party in this state and all across the country to basically protect not just illegal aliens in our country from a lawful interaction with law enforcement, but also to protect criminals is beyond me. It's a terrible, terrible policy. Possibly the worst thing that happened in the state this year.
I think so. Yeah.
You want to say anything else?
No, it's very concerning. I think both of you did a great job explaining it. Public safety is an issue, right? First and foremost priority for us is public safety, and it's very much a concern for everyone that you can have.
We'll come back to you, Brian.
It's about the specific issue.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead, Brian.
If Gail says go ahead, then it's go ahead.
I think you got, hold on one second, I think Brian's going to trump you.
Do you know if Massachusetts has a similar policy to this right now?
That I don't know. I'm not sure.
Because I think you might know where I'm going with this, because you've seen the commentary about it. Last weekend in New Hampshire, a young man who is actually a legal immigrant with a green card negligently drove through a procession of motorcyclists, killing 7 and wounding 3 more. And he was arrested in New Hampshire. He's a resident of Massachusetts. And they just kind of let him go. He was later arrested in Massachusetts. And it turns out that he has multiple convictions for DUI, multiple convictions for possession of drugs. And I think all of those things would have made him eligible to have his green card revoked and be deported. So does that mean that the people who are supporting these kinds of laws are actually okay with a drunk driving through a procession of motorcyclists and killing 7 people and just not reporting to ICE, just let them go?
I think that was a rhetorical question.
Yeah, I don't think you can, I don't think you can responsibly make that leap. I mean, no one's certainly okay with that. No one intended for that to happen, right? But the fact of the matter, right. Understood.
I would agree with you, that's reasonable and foreseeable, and that's why this policy is so terrible. It would be very difficult for me to say that, that was the desire of the people pushing it. I think their desire is simply to gain favor with that population for political purposes. And not paying any real significant attention to the ramifications. The whole immigration issue is a very difficult one, and it's very frustrating for me because I would like very much for us to have a solution to the immigration issue, except that's a federal issue, first off. And the law, by the way, the Trust Act and this expansion are in direct violation of our United States Constitution because the federal government has supremacy on the issue of immigration. So we have no business passing laws like this anyway, but nonetheless we have. The thing is that it seems to me that by passing laws like that, if you're in favor of something like that, that must also mean that you're in favor of the status quo, which is essentially having people come into our country illegally and having to live as second-class non-citizens, not being able to work lawfully, and not being able to really be part of our culture or community. I think that's wrong, and I think that's exploiting that population and trying to claim that you're on their side, and anyone that disagrees because they believe in a rule of law and a lawful immigration system is somehow racist or bigoted is a terrible, terrible twisting of reality. I want to see a resolution where we can have even more lawful immigration, but we need a lawful immigration policy first so that we can let people in by not having so many people come in illegally.
This gentleman over here.
This gentleman right here.
Go ahead.
Had a question. Thank you.
First, I'm Ted Krajewski here in town.
Hey, Ted.
First, I'd like to repeat what somebody else mentioned. Thank you, folks, for having this town hall.
Thank you,
It's
Ted.
now nice for the voters to see their representatives from time to time. Now, on the same topic, one thing I'd like to say on immigration is I am a first generation born in this country. My parents came from Europe, along with my brothers, came across, on the boat legally, went through the process, became citizens, got worked, whatever, jobs they can find, starting out in tobacco farms out in the Windsor area, or whatever, tobacco farms are, or used to be, I should say now. But now you folks, not just you yourselves, all your people in Hartford and all that, you are the representatives of us voters.
That's right.
How can you, your cohorts, not being derogatory, realistically represent us, your constituents here throughout the state with these kinds of laws, unilaterally passing such legislation without bouncing it off of the people that put you and all the others in office?
Well, I'll tell you, that's a good question. You're not going to like the answer, but I can appreciate that. My dad's family came to this country at the turn of the century, and came from Italy and came through Ellis Island and went through all those things. We still talk about stories about them getting their citizenship and setting up roots in New York City, right, in the boroughs and so forth. Pay their dues, right. In fact, my grandfather, one of the first things he did when he became an adult, when he came here and adopted this nation as his home, which we don't see anymore, was go off to war, right? The reality of it is, and for me, for my district is still, as from the core of Southington, as a lot of people here will tell you, it's still decidedly senior. So I still represent many first-generation immigrants, like yourself, who are much older, quite frankly. And they know clearly where I stand on immigration. The problem is, as Republicans, we are in the minority, and we all vote together to try to, oppose these types of policies that, they implement on the people. But unfortunately, when the votes are cast and one side has more than the other, and that's what they want, then that is the outcome. I mean, I know that's not the best answer, but unfortunately, it is the truth. I mean, that's what it comes down to. So, I have said many, many times publicly that that's a travesty. Because what happens is, when you become that single-party system, you basically have half of their population who doesn't have representation. They don't have a voice in state government. So you have a voice. Unfortunately, it doesn't possess any power.
My own opinion, if these individual items were put on a ballot to be voted on by the individuals, they would not pass.
Well, that's the thing. Putting things on referendum is a difficult task. It takes a long time.
I understand that.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that representatives are put into a position to oversee what their constituents want.
And we feel you, and we are on your side.
The way things are going.
Yeah, we feel you. We're on your side, and we are keeping up that fight as best that we can. Quite frankly.
I think that what we're missing here is that I don't know that that's an accurate statement to say that if you put that on the ballot, it wouldn't have become law. I mean, the fact is that these issues are on the ballot. Every time there is a election for state legislator or governor, these issues are discussed, and you see the results. Now, the three representatives that are sitting here that represent the town of Southington, we all voted against that policy. And in fact, I think we were very, very vocal. I've been extremely vocal on this policy. When they first did driver's licenses for illegal aliens, I led the fight on the floor against that. I've offered it as an amendment to have it repealed numerous times. But again, elections have consequences, and at the moment, the people in favor of those policies are winning. And it's our job, I feel, not just to represent my constituents in Hartford by carrying out their wishes, but also to educate as many people as I can about these things. That's why we're here, because we want to arm you guys with the information so that you can tell your friends and neighbors the facts on these things so that people know what's actually happening and what the consequences of these elections are. And I would say that, I never want to have anyone walk away with the impression that just because we're in the minority, we don't accomplish anything, because that is far from true. We have prevented many, many other bad things. We're losing the battle, that's for sure. We're outnumbered terribly. It's 90-60 in the House, I believe, and I think it is 22-14 in the Senate. So, I mean, it's hard to make anything happen. But we have so far prevented tolls from happening in the state of Connecticut. We have prevented the public option from going into effect. We prevented that other bill that I mentioned with the 364-day thing. So, I mean, we're stopping bad policy from happening. I would love to be stopping more bad policy from happening, but we are stopping some. Who's next?
I just wanted to make one quick comment
sure.
on that. We actually had, I sit on the Human Services Committee, and there was a big push this year for immigration policies, like the one Senator Sampson just discussed. There was actually a bill put in that they wanted to allow illegal immigrants 18 years and older that we pay for their medical benefits, pay for their health care. So that's an area where something that we were able to stop, right? And as Senator Sampson, there are some things that we can do. Sitting on that committee, I was very voiceful on it, against it. And that's the type of thing that we're doing. You see this document here that you have, and you're probably reading it, all this legislation that passed through. please know and understand that these are, a lot of these policies in here, and there's some that we did or did not vote in favor of. There's some things in here that we did. It's not something that we really, we just want to give you information, let you know what happened in Hartford this year. This is some of the things that passed. But it's not, it doesn't say that this is our document and that we actually voted in favor of this stuff. We're out there fighting every single day on your behalf as Republicans. And I think as Republicans, you know what our values are. Limited government, lower taxes, freedom and opportunity.
Remember, there were going to be taxes on groceries. I mean, we were
Right.
able to stop a lot of these things from happening. I mean, there's the shift of teacher pensions onto towns, which would have raised property taxes, another thing we were able to prevent. The forced regionalization of school districts. I mean, these are things that the majority wanted to achieve at the start of this session that we prevented them from doing. So we are effective in preventing things. There's only a certain amount of time, essentially, for them to achieve the goals that they have. And if we put up a big enough fight on certain things, we can stop them.
And you have a lot of power. You have more power than we do. Look what happened, look what's happening with tolls. There's so many people calling, signing petitions, getting involved in no tolls. It doesn't look like we're going to have a vote on it anytime soon. So you guys here have a lot of power, whether it be at the voting booth or calling your representatives in Hartford and speaking your mind. The more you do that, the more we can stop things. When people are silent, it makes it very difficult for us on our end. So that would definitely help us.
The handsome gentleman in the green shirt right there.
Warren Stevens, Southington, Connecticut. In case you don't know me, Senator.
Good to see you, Warren.
Good to see you, Warren. First, I want to thank you for tonight. I want to thank all of you for what you did in Hartford. I watched the CTN channel, as painful as it was. And I'm going to say something here that all this free this and that, all this coddling of these illegals, to me it's just to get Democrat votes. That's all it's about. Democrat Party in this state doesn't care about the people in this room, they care about power. And that's where I think is happening here. I want to thank you all especially for your fight on the Second Amendment issues. I'm not going to renegotiate that, but that, you know, that safe storage in the motor vehicle, somebody breaks into my car, steals a handgun. The way I read it, I face more punishment than the criminal does.
That is correct.
That's upside down. And this minimum wage and all this other stuff, you go around town here, Walmart, Home Depot, other places, more and more self-checkout kiosks, that's not gonna work out well. But I think I was on pain pills one night from the surgery. There's now, if you sell your home and you leave, there's an exit tax. So they're nailing us for getting the hell out of here. I'm sorry, folks, I don't know any other language. Well, I mean, they're punishing us for late. Could you explain that one, Senator?
Yeah,
And thank you all again.
Thank you very, very much, Warren. You said a lot there, and a lot of things that I might have said myself.
Oh, I have a lot more to say, but there's ladies in the room.
We are certainly in a battle of ideologies that I think is unprecedented in America. I mean, I think that there's always been, political parties, and they've always had their positions, and there's always been debate on subjects. But I believe that the political parties are so far apart now. It's really, really remarkable. And in my opinion, it's the Democratic Party that has moved way, way left. They have basically abandoned the core values and principles of America, which are freedom and opportunity in exchange for more socialism. And it's a trend that, if it continues, is going to end up breaking this state probably first in the whole country. And we can see it happening. We're like the canary in the coal mine for what you do if you have a state that goes down the path of full-on socialism. I'm glad you referred to the mansion tax as an exit tax. I said the same on the floor of the Senate when we were discussing the budget, because they kept calling it a mansion tax because they're trying to tell their supporters that they're going after those rich people who they would like their followers to believe are rich because they have something that they took from someone else, which is not true. That's not how economics works. And I spend a lot of time talking to young people to try and teach them about the fact that because someone else has something doesn't mean they took it from someone else. There's not just one pot of money. But there is indeed an exit tax, which basically says that if you sell your home in Connecticut, currently it has to be a very expensive home. I don't even remember the number, but it's like $2 million or $2.5 million. But watch out, because that's how it starts. Before long, that exit tax is going to apply to each and every one of us. You mentioned the minimum wage really quick, by the way, and I just want to bring up something because it's directly related to the way you put it. I mentioned when we first started talking today about the difference between intent and policy. What exactly is the minimum wage bill? What is it? What does it say? What does it do? What it does is it bans jobs that pay under $15. And if you had titled the bill an act banning jobs that pay less than $15, I don't know how many people would support such a policy. But that's what the minimum wage is. And I think it's important for us to try and make that clear to people, that the government does not have the power to force a business to give you a raise. And they're not going to, because people are not going to pay more for something than it's worth. None of us in here would spend $30,000 on a $20,000 car, and none of us would spend $300 on a $200 suit. And why would any business owner pay someone $15 an hour for something that's worth $10 an hour? They won't. Some of those people will certainly get new jobs that pay $15 an hour more, but they will be new and different jobs. All that policy does is prevent people who would otherwise had a job for under $15 from having it. It is a terrible policy. It is going to hurt not just businesses and working class people, but also the people they claim to want to help. And it's so important to educate people on these subjects because they think they're winning. They think they're winning by going out there and say, we are the champions of the people. We're going to give the workers a raise. It's those evil Republicans who are trying to stop us. And that is so wrong and so misguided. But we have to have the courage and bravery to tell people what the facts are on the ground. And that's what I want to see people in my party do more often. But I want to see my friends and neighbors be able to understand these issues in a way where they can go out and talk about them also. And I'm talking too much, I'm sorry.
No, that's
Go ahead.
No, yeah, you're right. You're right.
Hi,
You're
I'm
killing it.
Charles Gay, Irish Drive. I used to have a small, modest savings account with one of the local banks. Well, actually it's a branch of the TD Bank, Toronto Dominion Bank in Central. Anyway, I generally took money out of the checking account and the money was directly deposited, my pensions into the checking account. So I was focusing on the checking account, but my ATM card was able to access both the checking account, which I made frequent withdrawals from, and also the savings account. They were linked together. But from time to time, as I said, I didn't pay an awful lot of attention to the savings account, but from time to time, I would plug in the ATM card and just for a change, look to draw some money out of the savings account, and I couldn't access the savings account. And so I would, the following day, I would go to the bank and say, why can't I access the savings account anymore? Oh, yeah. Well, you must not have been using the savings account very much lately. I said, well, no, that's true, but why can't I access it anymore? Well, it has cheated to the state. Oh, it has cheated to the state because it was inactive. And you can get it back. We'll arrange you. You can have it right back tomorrow. You'll be able to access it.
How many years were you not using this account for?
I'm not certain. Over a year, maybe it was 2. I mean, it was they considered it a dormant account.
We were still using
Now,
your checking.
I have a paralegal certificate I acquired years ago. I mean, I understand something about the law, and I understand something about as cheating. And the principle, the way it was conveyed to me, was if you have a little old lady who dies in owning property and a savings account, and she didn't leave a will, and she has no living relatives, okay, well, I get it, you know, that money is cheats to the state, and probably rightfully so, okay? But in my instance, that savings account had my name on it, the bank had my address, phone number, they knew perfectly well who belonged to that account, and the state took my money anyway?
It sounds like they
Hello?
made an error. I mean, I can't imagine, I'm certain that the law does not allow them.
I don't think that's an error. I think that's the way they've changed the
Well,
law to read. I
Okay.
think they're going, I'm one out of 3,500,000 people in the state of Connecticut, and probably not even half of them probably don't have a savings account, I get that. But a lot of them probably have dormant savings account.
Right.
I strongly suspect, I can't shake the, the idea that the state is going around nipping into all these accounts and balancing the state's books that way.
Right. Well, usually what happens is, if you have a savings account and you don't use it for a long period of time, I don't know what the exact time frame is, but, and if there's no activity on it, like you said, they probably consider it dormant, and then it goes to the unclaimed property of the state of Connecticut, where you go online, you can look up to see if your name is there, and you can certainly reclaim anything that belongs to you. I don't know what the time frame is, though, for maybe, I don't know exactly what the exact banking law
Sir,
would be on that.
sir, hang around after the meeting and we'll grab your information and we'll definitely look into it. I'm curious now, hearing this.
That account's gone now. I mean, I gradually phased it out because I was tired of, that happened to me 2 or 3 times. And it got to be a nuisance. And so I gradually drew down.
Well,
the
I'm going to
account.
certainly investigate what the law is, and I think it should be at least a significant minimum number of years. It sounds to me like something's wrong, so.
That wouldn't even matter. How about you, ma'am? The same?
The key thing, to my understanding of the concept, when it was initially explained to me, was that the account could not be identified, it could not be linked to an individual to pass it on to. There was no heirs, successors, or assigns, as they say.
It's linked to your checking account.
This this
true,
lady, woman over
I
here.
just wanted to say, don't you think it's important for the bank to at least send out a notice? Of
course.
People know that this is happening, you know.
Of course.
And giving you a certain amount of time to, you know, respond.
Certainly. Yeah,
Absolutely.
I don't want to spend
Agreed. No, I agree.
Yeah.
I think we're all in agreement here that something happened that should not have happened. We're going to look into what the law is and try and resolve it, and if need be, we'll try and change the law to make it so it's more reasonable. I just don't want to devote the whole meeting to this one issue, but it is important. Thank you for bringing it to us, to our attention, and we'll follow up. Go ahead.
Joe.
Hi, my name is Jeff Lockwood, and I'd like some clarifications about the tolls. If the tolls went into effect, and I don't think we've seen the end of it yet, if the monies they collect for a year, does that mean, say they collect $1, does that mean they put $1 into the tolls? Or does that mean it goes to the legislators and they say, well, we're going to put 20 cents into this account, 30 cents into this account? I mean, can they break it up? Or does all the monies have to go into the tolls?
Senator, I'll
not
let you.
sure.
Answer the
Yeah,
question.
go ahead.
Is the question clear? Is that question clear? Yeah, you can go on for an hour with this.
I know.
You opened up a can of worms.
I don't want to monopolize
Worms. You
the.
might be able to get them all back in, you know, but in the time we have.
I don't want to.
I want to understand your question, if you would repeat it for me. I want to make sure I understand your question. Just give me your question one more time. I'm not sure I completely understand your question.
The monies that are generated from the tolls in a year's time, does that money go back into the repair of the roads, or does it go to the legislators and they say, okay, instead of putting $1 into the tolls, we're going to put in 80 cents,
Now I
and the rest
understand. Now
is going to
you're
go
gonna-
to the general fund?
Now I understand.
I think that's the core of the problem, but we're certainly going to let Senator
Do
Sampson.
you even
Depends on
know,
that
do you
one.
even know where to start on that?
Yeah.
Well, I very simply put, I will tell you that, you know, we have a transportation lockbox now, right? That says that transportation funds, you know, will go into this lockbox, right? But they need to get there first, as you obviously know, and I think that's what you're alluding to, right?
Yes.
So could these funds still be diverted before they get there? And the answer is, of course, and they've done that historically. We've had, you know, that's been going on since the beginning of time. That's the simple answer to your question. Yeah,
That's what
all
I
right.
figured.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about this for quite a long time, and I think that's a
Hours.
simple answer to your question.
This gentleman back here.
Yeah, I'm Ray Lasky, Pattonwood Drive. Could you just elaborate a little bit on, I know the tolls are just stalled at the moment, but I don't understand the mechanism. What are the expectations going forward? Who's looking for what in order to put the tolls in, which of course no one wants. What do we have to look forward to? What's the process?
He needs a water.
Governor Lamont is looking for votes. That's the answer to the question.
Right. Simple.
Yeah, I mean, that's really what it is. I mean, I think he's trying to save face at this point, which is kind of odd because he's trying to keep a campaign promise that is different than his actual campaign promise. But I believe that he thinks that tolls is something that he campaigned on and he wants to achieve it now. So that's what's been happening.
What does he need to get it through?
What he needs is more votes. Every Republican has come out already and said that we're not in support of any tolling. And the reason for that is that the issue is not to generate more revenue for the state of Connecticut. The state of Connecticut is already taking more revenue from the taxpayers in more ways, in more amounts than they should. And we want to see that reversed, not any more burdens placed on the people in the state. Plus, I mean, we have a problem with people leaving as it is. Citizens, businesses, are leaving day by day. I'm a real estate agent. I see it firsthand. So adding tolls would only make that situation worse.
I firmly believe during his 4 televised, or how many, 5 televised debates, when he said, one of my measures is I'm going to put tolls on I-95, maybe 91, for the 18-wheelers. If he actually looked us in the eye like he did the day after he was elected and said, like Gomer Pyle, surprise, surprise, it's going to be everyone, he would have never made it by the slim margin that he made it, just on that alone.
Of course, one of the great ironies of that, which I love to tell the story, is that, he said it was just going to be for trucks, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, now he's going to put it on, they want to put it on Route 15. They want to put it on the Merritt Parkway, which doesn't even allow trucks. So, there's a mountain of irony there that I can never get around to being quite jovial. So they will need the votes. 1 second. So they will need the votes, right, to pass tolls. And they will need to pass, as we all here suspect, on party lines. In other words, the votes that they'll need to pass in the House of Representatives, I'll speak for that alone, will all come from the Democratic side. Now, that number hasn't been as much as they'd want it to. And if you look to the back of the budget document, you will find 116 earmarks to the tune of $3 million or so, roughly, that if you took the couple of weeks to investigate what all those things were by the names that they listed in the budget, you would find that these are probably, with all due respect, put there so that they can sweeteners to perhaps encourage votes for these tolls, because understand, the public has, we've had an outcry, and it's difficult for representatives and even Democratic districts who are a little more moderate to make that vote and to stay in office. But be rest assured that, and I tell people to make sure you understand this very clearly, when you hear that we are going into special session for a vote on tolls, there'll be no vote. It's already passed. So this is one of those things where no news is good news. Once you hear that we're going in, understand that the deal has already been done and it's going to pass. Now we'll make them suffer the time constraints that we want to get our, as you said before, this good gentleman said, we want to make sure that our constituents have their voice there, but that is the reality of it.
Well said.
Yes, ma'am.
Has there ever been a year without a special session?
Not since I've been there, 10 years, 9 years.
Other than the NoTollsConnecticut.org, can you direct us to other groups who are aggressively opposing tolls and soliciting names to work against this?
Let me just quickly say one thing. There's a lot of towns that are putting ordinances in that they're against tolls. So, for example, I sit on the town council still in Woolcott, and we passed an ordinance for no tolls. That's certainly something that you can encourage your town to do by, contacting your council members and so forth and asking them on both sides of the aisle to support something like that, because that sends a strong message to the state when a lot of towns do that. The NoTollsCT.com, there's a lot of talk radio, 1080, I believe. They're constantly talking about tolls, no tolls, getting people involved. So there's a lot out there that you can do. But I would certainly start with that ordinance.
Yeah, it's a battle of wills at this point. I mean, we have to keep the pressure on if we're opposed to tolls to make sure that people understand that it's going to affect them in a future election. And the governor is out there trying everything possible to encourage Democrats to support a tolling plan. You might have heard him on the radio or something saying that he would help them in their campaigns down the road if they helped him pass tolls. So there's a lot of pressure. The sweeteners that Representative Fusco mentioned, I think a lot of that was to get them even to vote for the state budget. So I don't know how much more sweeteners he's got in his back pocket. Who's next? Anyone new?
Anyone besides Brian? Mr. Lozano.
Lou Lozano, Southington. Am I correct in that with the tolls, there'll be a group that will administer the tolls, and that the legislators themselves will not say, we're going to raise the toll, but these unelected people will be the ones that will determine whether or not the toll goes up or down?
That's correct. They will put together a transportation authority, and they will put together a transportation finance authority, and they will be the oversight for the tolls.
Yeah, and that's clearly as a mechanism to put one step of distance between the actual tolls being implemented and themselves.
Yeah.
Who knows what an actual bill will look like at this point? There has been numerous proposals for tolls over the last 5 or 6 years. This is a good thing because they have been unable to pass any of those plans, no matter how expansive or moderate they are. So we're going to keep the pressure on for sure.
And understand one thing, that, they're going to need people to implement the tolls. It's looking to expand government by 130, 40, 50 employees with, collective bargaining agreements, which we, refer to as CBAC, with these, with these good salaries and these pensions. And
yeah, that's the reason for the tolls anyway. The reason for tolls is not because the state of Connecticut needs money to fix our transportation infrastructure. We have the money for that. Right. The federal government gives us $800 million in our gas taxes that we pay back, more than the state actually pays in. We get a pretty good benefit in Connecticut from the federal government. As far as that goes. And that money has been used for other purposes year after year after year. If we were actually using that to take care of our roads and bridges, we wouldn't have a problem at all. But we could go back to using that for roads and bridges without much problem. We also have the highest gas tax of a state in the whole country. We have a gas tax a lot of other states don't even have. I point out to people all the time that Massachusetts, for instance, they have tolls on the Mass Pike. Well, and they are a state that has 3 times our population. The state of Massachusetts takes less money in tolls than we take in as a state in our own gas tax. Right. So, I mean, in effect, we're already paying more than Massachusetts drivers are with the tolls that they have. And you also know that states all over the country that have tolls, they usually have tolls on 1 or 2 main roads, and that's it. All of the plans that I have seen are put a toll on every significant road in the state every 6 miles to catch everyone. It's madness. It really is. And it's all to just create another giant bureaucracy. It's a very ineffective way of raising money because it costs a lot of money to get it. You got to send out toll bills and collect them and pay state employees and their pension obligations and all that stuff for processing toll payments and everything else. What a waste of money. You might get 30 cents on a dollar back from the taxpayers. What a terrible way to do it. And it just goes to show that the reason is not to generate the revenue. It's to expand government and create another bureaucracy.
Our intake for transportation funding on a yearly basis is $2 billion. It's about 1.4 in taxes from the people and another $600 million from the federal government, roughly in those terms. So the state takes in $2 billion. You need to take a minute or two to consider how much money that is. It's staggering. And that's every year. That's every year. And that's on top of the $9 billion they take from the taxpayers in income tax per year. Once again, staggering figures. Staggering.
I just had a quick question for the audience. How many people here really have trust in the legislators up in Hartford? that they are going to, that if they ever implemented tolls, which we are 100% against, that money would actually be used for our roads. Does anybody here think that would happen?
Get the net.
Most likely, I would think most likely that's what would, happen. I mean, they probably have people watching them if that money got used for something else,
Do you trust that that's what would happen? I guess.
Not 100%. I mean, I'm just,
Right.
most likely that's what would happen. Probably, I'm not saying I'd be shocked if something else happened, but,
Right. So,
Well, history says that otherwise,
Yeah.
because if you look at what's happened to the Special Transportation Fund, which essentially was a lockbox. I mean, the reason why they set up the Special Transportation Fund was a place to say, this is where we're going to put the money to take care of our roads and bridges. They've been sweeping that year after year after year. The day they passed the lockbox, the transportation lockbox in the House of Representatives, they passed 2 bills on that day. One was to make the transportation lockbox, and the other one was to sweep the Special Transportation Fund money for some other purpose.
In the same special
And I
session.
remember getting up on the floor and saying, how would anyone believe or trust any of you people to do this? Remember the busway, the New Britain to Hartford busway. Well, that money is the money that we get from the federal government to fix our roads and bridges. It's not there to create some kind of golden shovel opportunity for Governor Malloy, and that's what he used it for. What a waste of money that's still costing us money year after year after year after. I see this lady shaking her hand. Well, I'm not, but there's nothing to agree or disagree. I'm stating facts. You can disagree with my facts if you can document them.
What positive thing happened in this legislative session? We talked about a lot of the negative things. Tell me something bipartisan, positive that happened.
There are a great many. Well, I'm happy to answer the question. I mean, one thing
I want to know something.
Yeah, no, and I'm going to answer your question. So I'm glad that you came out tonight. I appreciate the dialogue and the opportunity to have it. So one thing I want people to understand is that, yes, Republicans and Democrats fight like cats and dogs on a lot of things, but they're only a small percentage of the things in reality. Maybe 75% of the legislation that passes the legislature in Hartford happens on a unanimous basis or nearly so. It's amazing how many bills pass that everyone agrees with. It's only when it comes down to like the real ideological divide. I believe in the death penalty. Most Democrats do not. I don't believe in letting violent criminals out on early. And they believe that the state ought to provide an early release program for certain criminals. I don't believe that the state should spend and tax more money, and they do. These are the differences, and really it comes down to like a core basic difference of what you think, whether you think freedom is important or you think the government has the ability to create a better society. And I'm trying to be very generous in offering a real perspective that I think that my Democratic colleagues would not argue with. They just simply believe that the government is got the answer to make our world a better place. I don't believe that. I think that the government is inherently corrupt, and when you give it more and more power, it takes away freedom and opportunity for individual citizens to make their own choices. But we're allowed to have that disagreement, and we do. And I just feel like I think most people, if they knew the facts about what was happening, they would say, you know what, no matter where you are on this spectrum, it's gone way too far to the point where government has too much power. And that's the only argument that I would make to people that are still voting for Democrats in our state legislature, that's all. So I will tell you, we did pass 1 million bills. That's an exaggeration.
600?
But I got a list here of bills that we passed on a bipartisan basis. Senate Bill 356, which was an act establishing a Connecticut Apprenticeship and Education Committee, which basically sets up education programs for people to learn trades in Connecticut that are sorely lacking. You hear machine shops all the time trying to find people, that kind of thing. Pilot program for expansion of advanced manufacturing certificates. Mental health parity. To try and make it so that insurance companies provide more coverage for people that have mental health conditions and give it the same parity that you do with actual physical ailments. There was a bunch of bills on opioids. You were going to say something?
I would say they tightened the penalties for fentanyl.
Tighten the penalties for fentanyl.
Which is a big, which is huge.
Victims of sexual assault and family violence, we passed a law that keeps the records of the victims confidential. We passed a law to prevent upskirting, which is this terrible thing where people take pictures up skirts in malls and things like that. I don't know, people in Southington are probably aware of the huge uptick of car thefts that have been happening across our state. And we passed a law, Senate Bill 504, which I think it was a really good compromise. It's not exactly the way I would have done it. It has a piece for people that want to be really soft on crime and a piece for people that want to be hard on crime. Because what it does is it creates a diversionary program for first offenders. But on second offenders, it actually gives the court a real opportunity to crack down on people, which they don't have right now. Because right now, I guess, the court has to determine that that person is a risk to public safety. And there's plenty of case law that says that merely stealing a car doesn't count. But we're changing that in the law. I could go on.
Yeah.
There's bills for veterans, for seniors, for protecting children. We did a lot of bills together that were very, very effective. But we're going to disagree on the spending and taxes, and we're going to disagree about immigration, and we're going to disagree about gun laws.
Yeah, and thank you for asking that question, because, for us, we do these forums, and I say, gee, I feel really bad. We're always talking about negative things. It's not that it's negative, it's just that we disagree on certain principles than our colleagues do, the Democrats. Like you said, we do pass about 75% of the issues that we do agree on, and it doesn't seem, years ago, there was a middle. The Democrats and Republicans would work together, and it's unfortunate that it's not like that today, because the party has gone so far the other way, and it's very hard for compromise. So we will always disagree on those issues. We will always disagree. I know I will, and I'm sure I can speak for my colleagues here about raising taxes and having bigger government, because we never go to these forums and have somebody in the audience say to me, and I wish they would. If they did, maybe that would answer the question. I want to pay more taxes. I never see anybody in the audience saying that. And I don't see anybody in the audience saying, I want more government in my life. Right? Well, we don't hear that. So we are in that position where we don't agree with that. Right? We don't want bigger government. We don't want more taxes, and we will always disagree. But thank you for that question. There are good things that we do, and I do appreciate the dialogue.
Regardless of party, you still represent Democrats and Republicans.
I do, but I...
We're both my representatives.
Exactly.
So I appreciate that.
But I got to be honest with you. If I had, I do represent Democrats in my district, and I appreciate all of their support. But if I had a Democrat come up to me and say, gee, Gail, I really want you to raise taxes. I want to pay more. I'm going to disagree with them.
I don't think anybody's going to blame to say you don't
Or-
want to raise taxes.
Or or maybe they agree with the immigration laws, or maybe they agree with bigger government. I'm going to disagree respectfully, but I will do my best to represent you. So, thank you.
Right, and I mean, it's one of these things, I would love to have a forum dedicated only to discussing the real ideology behind these things. Kind of what I said before about our core system of how we see the world, which is, as I said, either a notion of what's critically important to you, maintaining your individual freedom, or the government can create a better society. And I think we all fit somewhere along that spectrum, and I think the Democrats are more on the government can spectrum, and Republicans are more on the freedom side of the spectrum. And I think it's a worthwhile conversation, so people will get a real perspective of where the core values that come from that create all these policies.
Yeah, I'm Nancy Savino-Sobolewski. I live here in Southington. Actually, I've emailed John Fusco before. I was just wondering, did you mention the drug fentanyl?
What, fentanyl?
Yeah, fentanyl, yeah.
Fentanyl. They increased the penalties for fentanyl if you're dealing fentanyl drug.
Is it fentanyl? Is that legal?
Fentanyl?
No, it ends in a YL.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fentanyl.
Fentanyl, I call it, yeah.
Is that a legal drug? What page is that on?
I don't know if it's in here.
Because actually going back about 5 years ago, Jason, my husband there, was given that drug in the hospital for a procedure, and his blood pressure went sky high.
Yeah,
it is a prescription drug, but the sale of it on the street is illegal.
And I think, I'm not sure, but they mix it with heroin, and people it's fatal.
Oh, all right.
Yeah. There's been a lot of overdoses.
They had him admit him to the emergency room. They're afraid he's going to have a stroke. Is it on here anywhere?
I don't know if it's in here, but we can certainly send you.
Okay.
What page?
Page 16.
Oh, there you go.
Okay.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, thank you for that.
There you go.
Vicki.
Yeah, no, it's House Bill 5524 was the bill. I don't know what the Public Act is.
I just wanted to say, excuse me for interrupting.
Hopefully not interrupting
I
the
had
use.
surgery today.
Yeah.
And in my.
Fritz gonna have a stroke. They gave him that fentanyl. Oh,
Yeah.
she'll have a
So,
stroke.
illegal drug.
Oh, there's
Used correctly.
certainly a medical use for it, absolutely.
Absolutely.
It's when it's sold on the street.
Makes its way to the street.
That's the problem.
I mean, morphine's
that's-
a legal drug too. I mean,
And that's always been, and not to, to segue too far, but that's been my biggest contention with opioids. There's a huge crisis, as we all know, with opioids. We have more people dying every year from overdose of opioids than we have the year before. I think, the general public, there's an outcry for them for more to be done. Our hands are tied to some degree as state legislators. We can only do so much. And I would urge, and I'm going to give you my perspective on it, so that perhaps they can urge you to contact your U.S. representatives and your U.S. senators. Because these, and I'm not going to name any of them, but they are certainly tied to Big Pharma, right? These are the guys that make these drugs, right? And they have huge lobbying firms. They spend enormous sums of money to change legislation, to enact legislation on a federal level that helps their companies. And I would submit to you that when there is a 30-day supply of opioids for every man, woman, and child in the nation, that's a problem with supply. And I hold my U.S. congressman solely responsible for that outcome. Because without that supply, we don't have that amount of, we don't have those drugs on the street in such large quantities. And therefore, that's not a cure to the problem, but I believe in my heart of hearts that that's where it starts. So, I don't know if there's anyone in this room who hasn't been affected by opioids. I mean, I'm positive that someone here has been affected, or some family member has been affected. And I would urge you to reach out to our state senators and representatives.
I don't want to disagree with my colleague, but I will just point out that I don't care for policies that are enacted by the state legislature that tell doctors what they can and cannot prescribe. And that is like part of the road that has been gone down that I don't think we should. I do think it's important that we prevent physicians that are acting outside the realm of good medicine when they prescribe these dangerous drugs. But at the same time, there are plenty of people that live their lives in pain, and they need to be able to get access to significant supplies of those drugs just for their own welfare. So, and this is another issue I could talk about all day, which is the state government is involved in every aspect of our lives. I mean, I'm a real estate agent, and my colleagues here will tell you what they do for a living also. But one thing we're not all teachers or doctors or road mechanics or we don't have the background to be legislating a lot of these individual policies, and I think that's part of the problem. I think that we just shouldn't. I think the free market works in most of these cases, and we don't need the state government sticking their nose in all of these areas.
Dan.
Just wanted to bring up a couple things that we have over here. One of them, we just talked about opioids. I really don't like the word opioid. It's a prescribed drug.
Yeah.
And when I see this here, I don't see enough consequences for people who do it in the wrong way. Yeah, I know a lot of people who need pain medication, but there are a lot of other ways to alleviate pain. That we continue to, the pharmaceutical companies pay doctors incentives to prescribe this medication. But we've had one time where we ran out of vaccinations for the flu, couldn't get enough vaccinations and other things, but we have plenty of prescribed medication that shouldn't have been on the street. So you're right, we have too much of that. So I would rather see more consequences for the people and doctors who actually abuse that, because there are patients who need that in certain cases. But for 12 weeks, I've had surgery, and 3 days for some of these drugs is all you need. After that, you're really, something's hallucinating. So there's other things that they can take you down, but I was given almost a 30-day supply, when I should have only had enough for like 5 days. So I turned it back into the police department. So the opioid should be called a prescription drug problem, and that we need to affect that way. The other one is, we have all this bonding for underfunded pension plans. And we're always paying with these contracts, and then we have these union contracts that we have these deals for 8, 9, 10 years. These collective bargaining programs were, the number I saw was something like $80 billion in unfunded pension obligations.
That's correct.
And one of the things they enacted here, and another for teachers, which they do a great job, super for teachers, but why can't we allow them to contribute to their own 401k plans, while us having to allocate $75, $80 billion unfunded? Where was the money that was funded, and why isn't it invested somewhere to give us a return on investment to cover some of our expenses? I never see it invested, but it's always drained. And if I calculate the amount of individuals who are on pensions and the amount of money that comes out of that fund, it doesn't compute. It's like the money is going into a sinkhole. So we need to tidy that up to find out why that money isn't covering it. It's like Social Security. It's where we know they take that money, they take it off the top, like a poker game, right? They rake the top. But $80 billion, my suggestion would be, you know what, as of today, there is no more pension plan.
I can answer the question.
Till we catch up. Go ahead.
The reason why the state of Connecticut is not fully funding the pensions is because it is not the most effective way to encourage more Democratic votes in the next election. That's the reason why. I mean, I hate to be so political, but that's the reason. If you notice that every cycle, at least since I've been really actively involved, I got elected with Governor Malloy, our state budget goes up by a couple, $3-4 billion every year. And we always have a deficit. In fact, we know on the day that the budget is being passed that there's going to be a deficit. They know ahead of time that there's going to be a budget deficit when they pass the budget. And that is because they like it that way. Because having a deficit creates a crisis and also a reason to increase taxes. It's exactly what it is. The whole point of letting our transportation infrastructure fall apart and finding more and more ways to bring in money to allegedly pay for it is also a crisis designed to get more money flowing into the government. A state budget is a question of priorities. And if you had somebody who was managing those priorities like an actual for-profit business or someone who was responsibly running their household, they would pay off their debts. Because at this point, nearly half of our state budget is paying for our unfunded pension liabilities. That makes it extremely hard to even balance a budget at that point because you only have the other half of the budget to play with because you have to make those payments. And they're just making that situation worse time and time and time again. And this budget is the same. The news this week has been about how the budget's not even balanced. Well, I will tell you that I haven't seen a balanced budget. The budget is only supposed to be balanced according to the Constitution on paper, okay? Which basically means that the revenue side has to match the spending side, but they use like this concocted revenue number. Oh yeah, we're gonna have all this money. And it never adds up at the end, and you end up having a big hole, and you have to raise taxes to get that money. And that's what they keep doing year after year after year. Governor Malloy got elected in 2010, inherited a $3.5 billion budget deficit, and proceeded to pass the largest tax hike in the history of our state, $4 billion. But you know what else he did at the same time? He passed a budget that spent an additional $4 billion and left us with that same $3.5 billion hole 2 years later. And that's all the evidence you need to see that that's why and how they keep doing this. Because it's a way to keep the government growing and expand entitlements. And now, I mean, you know, I hate to be so broadly partisan, but I think it's important for people to know. This is where the votes are coming from that make sure that Ned Lamont gets elected governor and the Democrats have big majorities in the legislature. That's where they come from. They have created people that depend on the government to survive. Either they're people that are receiving entitlements in the form of food stamps or housing subsidies or things like that, or they are being paid through the state for some other purpose. They're direct state employees, or they work for a nonprofit organization that gets funding from the state. And many of these are great organizations that do good work, but there is just so much, and all of it depends on the state budget paying their share, and they're all there saying, what about my piece? And the danger of that is many of them will say, I'm okay if everybody else gets their piece too, as long as I get mine. And that's what makes the thing grow like out of control. And that's where we are today. We need someone who says, we need a responsible budget that the citizens of this state can afford and make our state competitive. We need to be more attractive to people, to businesses, to senior citizens, so that people want to come here and grow our economy, because growing our economy is the only way we're going to have the money to actually pay the debt off. And I'm sorry for that.
That's right. I'm going to add just two things to that before I take your question, just to get an idea where I'm coming from. Two simple things. The first one is that you're talking about unfunded pension liabilities. The union contracts were never voted on by the legislation. They were passed by the majority party, let's say, for the last, in an effort to be, bipartisan. They were passed by the majority party for the last almost 4 decades. Okay, that's number one. Number two, they looked at investing that money, like you said, it was invested. But they made those arrangements, they made those contracts based on an 8% return on their investment. And these investments never got anywhere north of, 5. And so that was the beginning of the problems. And the travesty of it is there's no correction was made to correct either one of those two things. And so they can just continued on. And then there was diversion of payments into those funds and so forth, and it just got out of whack to where now, in an effort to save a couple of $100 million, they re-amortized those payments, right? So we can reduce state budget by X amount of dollars, but essentially adding a $10 billion balloon payment, adding 17 years to the note, and then an additional $10 billion at the end, who's our people in this room, obviously, their great-grandchildren will be asked to pay. So hopefully that gives you some indication of
Let me just add to that. And Senator Sampson made a good point when he was talking about the unfunded pensions, right? It kind of goes to the core of why we are against bigger government. Every time we increase the scope of government and the size, that gets bigger. So luckily now, those contracts for the union contracts do come to the legislature for approval. Unfortunately, the Republicans being in the minority, those contracts get passed through very easily. And what's really disturbing on a lot of these contracts, here's a little trivia for you. Does anybody want to guess how many days off a year? You can work 1 year for the state of Connecticut. And do you know how many days you get off? Paid. 9 weeks. 45 days. 45 days you get off. Now, they will tell you, and I don't fault the people that work for the state. God bless them. If I worked for the state, I would be sharing as well. They're hardworking people. But it's negotiated that way. So they get 15 holidays, 15 personal days, and 15 sick days. 45 days a year. Now, in the private sector, how many years do you have to even work to get 4 weeks vacation, right?
6, 7, 8, 9 years.
These are very, very generous contracts. And what people will tell you is, well, we don't use those days off. We put them in the bank and we accumulate them to maybe 100 or 200 days. So when we retire, we get paid out on those. But guess what? They get paid out of percentages at the rate that they're making that time when they retire, not what they were making when they put it in. So it's these type of contracts that are very, very generous that gives me pause.
Up until last year, these contracts were rarely voted on. In fact, I have never saw them voted on the first 4 terms I was in, because they were deemed approved if they were not acted upon by the legislature. One positive thing that came out of the session in 2017 is we made it a law that says those union contracts have to be voted on. 25 of those contracts were approved this year. They're contained in this new budget, which spends another $2 billion more than last year, and you know all the myriad of taxes that are paying for it. And it's important to me just to make sure people understand not a single Republican voted for any of those 25 budgets. And not because we don't believe that the people that work for the state aren't good people that deserve it. It's because we just can't afford this anymore. And it goes to my previous comment about why and how the elections are happening the way they are, because that's exactly why. It's pay for play. The other thing is, if I'm a young person living in Connecticut, I have no idea why I would be supporting the policies that are coming out of the Democratic Party today, because they are bankrupting my future every day. I mean, the amount of money that is being added to the state deficit and the individual responsibility for every taxpayer in the state is exorbitant. And that's all going to fall on the people that are millennials today. They're going to be paying for it. And I can't understand why they support a party that does that. I really don't. This gentleman's been waiting forever.
Yes, go ahead, sir.
And we got 5 minutes.
Okay. I want to talk about some old history that may also be current history. In the 2018 session, you guys passed a Social Security state income tax waiver. True?
One more time?
Yes. Well, yes and no. Yes, it was made part of the 2017 budget, but us guys didn't pass
This
it.
year. It's going to be this tax year, 2019.
Right. During Malloy was giving some advice to the incoming governor and said one of the ways you might want to balance the budget is by eliminating those kinds of income tax waivers for retirees.
They remain. They
And
did
a couple times during the session, even some of the Democrats had talked about that. Did anything happen in this session?
No, everything is still, if you read my op-ed that I had in the paper, they all still are still in place. Yes, and they will phase in, so that's their Social Security, and then they will, and then the following year, in 2020, they'll begin to phase that in on pensions on a percentage. Okay.
I had one more question, though. What was I going to say?
The state of Connecticut
I had
should
a
not
problem,
tax
even though
pensioners.
I'm being a little greedy. I'm going to be a little greedy.
Go ahead.
But the bill that you passed exempted income to the extent of income exempted by the federal income tax. And that's not a significant amount of money for a lot of people. What the exemption should have been based on was 100% of the gross benefit. You know, when you're doing the 1040, you start with a figure, and then the government subtracts some amount of that they're going to tax you on, and some they're not going to tax you on. I'm going to write a letter to you guys as we get into the next session to ask you to look at that. And go back and see if we cannot exempt the full 100% of the Social Security benefit from state income tax.
I just remind you, and we would not disagree with you, and it was here, but always remember that it's easy to get at things a little bit at a time, because when you ask for too much, the answer could be no.
But I thought, given the years and years that I've been following this issue and the Democrats blocking this waiver, I thought they could have done it a little better for us.
Understood.
Thank you.
Understood.
Yeah, I mentioned a few minutes ago, we need to make Connecticut more attractive to everyone. That's one way to do it. Stop taxing pension and Social Security income so people don't leave this state with their,
Why would you not want to keep
yeah,
seniors
well, keep
in the
them
state?
here
They're
to
low-cost
spend their
citizens.
retirement income.
That's right.
All right, we have 1 minute and change left, so.
Go ahead, ma'am.
No, go ahead. I'd rather listen to a
You're
question.
saying how the millennials are leaving because of the tax burden on them is so high that they're going to be leaving the state. Is it worse than it would be in New York? Because I came from New York and I'm used to a very high, income tax I was paying before I left. In 2000, when I moved here, there was federal tax, state tax, sometimes local tax. And I think I paid about 28% of my income went to tax, and I never got anything back. So I'm just wondering, is it worse in Connecticut than it is in New York and other states?
All I can tell you
In
is,
other states, yes.
Yes.
I mean, it's worse than New York, but not much worse. But if you start comparing to other states, South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee, yes, it is, definitely. The
And what
tax
I
burden in
hear-
Connecticut is now more than New York.
and what we're hearing is that young people go off to college and then come back to get roots here in Connecticut, find that it's just far more difficult to survive here than it was in the states that they were previously in while they were attending college. And so they're starting to understand economics, I guess, as they graduate college, and the quality of life and so forth. Yeah.
And let me just bring up one more thing before we go, because I know it's 8 o'clock, just because I know there's a lot of shoppers in this room. August 1st, believe it or not, there's going to be a charge on your plastic bags when you go to the grocery store. 10 cents, plastic bags. That was passed within the budget. So, of course, we did not vote in favor of that. But I just wanted to bring it to your attention because we are almost into July.
Thanks for ruining my night, Gail.
And then come August 1st, you will be getting charged
skin.
a tax on your plastic bags, and then by next year, they will be banned.
Yeah,
So
the list of taxes
it's
is
a
pretty
lot.
extraordinary, and
There's
we're
a
going to
lot.
wrap it up because it's 8 o'clock. I want to thank everybody for coming out. I also want to thank CTN for taking the time
Yes.
to drive out here
Absolutely.
and record this event tonight. That was really nice of them to do. We're going to stick around for a few
everyone.
minutes after if you have a question or a concern, and thank you Ed, for coming, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
What?